Think about the last time you watched someone walk into a room and instantly take control without saying a word. We've all seen it. That person who makes everyone stop and pay attention just by being there. It's not their voice, not their size, but something else. Their silence. The most powerful people don't need to talk much. They know when to stay quiet. They understand that what they don't say is often more powerful than what they do say. This isn't by accident. It's a strategy that Sun Tzu and Machiavelli understood centuries ago, a technique that the most influential figures throughout history have mastered to gain and maintain power. Speak only when it improves upon silence. This ancient wisdom reveals something profound about power that most people never grasp. While ordinary people chase validation through endless talking, those who truly understand power wield silence like a weapon, a shield, and a throne all at once. They know intuitively what most spend a lifetime never learning. True dominance doesn't come from filling space, but from controlling it. Notice how in moments of crisis, it's never the loudest person who takes control. It's the one who speaks last, who waits until others have exhausted themselves with opinions and suggestions. Their words carry weight precisely because they're rationed, measured, deployed with purpose. This isn't coincidence, it's strategy. And throughout history, those labeled as villains have mastered this aspect of power more completely than heroes ever could. You see it in every realm of human interaction. The person constantly seeking attention versus the one who naturally commands it. The difference isn't in what they say, but in the silence they cultivate around their words. One chases power, the other embodies it. One speaks to be heard, the other is heard because they rarely speak. Sun Tzu wrote, "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. But how does one conquer without confrontation?" The answer lies in understanding the psychological weight of unspoken power. The general who reveals nothing while learning everything about his opponent has already won before the battle begins. The master strategist doesn't need to declare their brilliance. They simply position themselves where victory becomes inevitable. The villain doesn't announce their plans. They don't seek approval. They create a vacuum of information that others rush to fill with their own fears, assumptions, and insecurities. This is the first principle of power through silence. Create mystery, and others will give you the very information you need to control them. Their imagination becomes your weapon. Their uncertainty becomes your strength. Watch how powerful figures use this tactic. They ask questions instead of making statements. They allow uncomfortable pauses to stretch until the other person, unable to tolerate the emptiness, begins speaking nervously, revealing vulnerabilities, doubts, information they never intended to share. The power doesn't come from interrogation, but from creating the conditions where others interrogate themselves. Observe the next time you're in a meeting with someone truly influential. They don't dominate the conversation with the volume of their words. They listen intently, they watch reactions, they speak concisely, often asking questions that force others to reveal their positions while keeping their own cards close. What seems like simple conversation is actually a sophisticated intelligence-gathering operation. This isn't mind-reading, it's strategic patience. The corporate leader who sits quietly during negotiations, while the other side nervously fills the silence with concessions. The interrogator who says nothing, knowing the suspect will eventually speak simply to relieve the psychological pressure of silence. The therapist, who uses strategic pauses to encourage deeper revelation than any question could. Machiavelli observed that men are so simple of mind and so much dominated by their immediate needs that a deceitful man will always find plenty who are ready to be deceived. The greatest deception isn't an elaborate lie. It's the absence of information that forces others to deceive themselves. When you withhold your thoughts, others project their own fears and desires onto your silence. Pay attention to how often people rush to interpret silence according to their own insecurities. The employee assumes the boss's silence means disappointment. The lover interprets their partner's quiet as anger. The negotiator reads hesitation as rejection. In each case, silence becomes a mirror reflecting back the observer's own thoughts, often revealing more about them than about the silent party. Consider how villains in cinema utilize this power. Darth Vader speaks barely 30 lines in the original Star Wars, yet dominates every scene. Hannibal Lecter's power comes not from physical strength, but from calculated words surrounded by patient silence. The Joker creates chaos, not merely through action, but through contradictory explanations that leave his true motives shrouded in mystery. There's a particular type of discomfort that emerges in the presence of someone who withholds their thoughts. You've felt it yourself, the uncertainty of not knowing where you stand with them, the nagging feeling that they know something you don't. This discomfort creates a power imbalance that the strategist cultivates deliberately. Strategic silence isn't just about withholding information, it's about creating a void that pulls others in, that makes them orbit around you rather than the reverse. Power isn't forcing others to listen to you, it's making them desperate to hear what you might say next. Look at how this works in everyday settings. The person who speaks constantly at meetings quickly becomes background noise, but the one who speaks rarely, everyone leans forward when they finally decide to contribute. Their words carry an implied importance simply because they're scarce. When they say, "I have concerns about this approach," the room stops, not because their concerns are necessarily more valid, but because the rarity of their intervention grants it special weight. This is what Machiavelli meant when he wrote that a ruler should be both feared and loved. But if one must choose, fear is more reliable than love. Silent power creates a specific kind of fear, not terror, but uncertainty. And humans will do almost anything to resolve uncertainty, including surrendering their power. The ordinary person reveals everything they know, everything they feel, everything they want. The strategist reveals only what serves their purpose. Notice someone who understands power never tells you their full reasoning, never shows all their cards, never explains more than necessary. Each piece of information withheld becomes leverage. Think about the last time you were in a disagreement. Who held the advantage? The person frantically explaining themselves, or the one who remained composed, revealing little, watching as the other person became increasingly emotional? Emotion creates transparency. Transparency creates vulnerability. Vulnerability can be exploited. The villain understands that the need to explain oneself is a weakness. The need to be understood reveals insecurity. The need to convince others betrays a lack of conviction in oneself. This is why the truly powerful don't justify their actions or decisions. They state them plainly and allow the silence that follows to enforce their position. Sun Tzu understood this when he wrote, "If your opponent is temperamental, seek to irritate him." A temperamental opponent reveals everything. The master of silence reveals nothing until the perfect moment. They understand that information isn't just power, it's timing. The right word at the wrong moment loses its impact. The right word at the precisely calculated moment can change everything. Consider how effectively silence can be used to provoke emotional responses. When you expect acknowledgement but receive silence. When you demand answers but face a calm, impassive stare. When you seek reassurance but encounter only ambiguity. The emotional impact of these moments can be devastating precisely because they deny the closure we instinctively seek. This strategic use of silence operates in 3 dimensions: information control, emotional leverage, and timing manipulation. Let's examine each one. Information control is the most obvious. By speaking less and listening more, you gather intelligence while giving away nothing. Every interaction becomes asymmetrical. You learn about others while they learn nothing about you. Over time, this creates an insurmountable advantage. The less others know about your thinking, your plans, your motivations, the less prepared they are to counter your moves. Look at how effective negotiators use this principle. They ask probing questions, they listen intently, they offer minimal information about their own position. They understand that in any exchange, the party with less information will almost always get the worst deal. The power dynamic isn't determined by who talks more, but by who reveals less while learning more. In intelligence operations, the concept of need to know isn't just about security, it's about power. Information is compartmentalized not just to prevent leaks, but to ensure that no single individual has a complete picture, except those at the very top. This information asymmetry maintains the hierarchy more effectively than any formal authority structure could. The second dimension is emotional leverage. Silence creates discomfort, and discomfort creates emotional reactions. When faced with silence, most people become anxious, then defensive, then desperate to fill the void. Each of these states reveals vulnerabilities that can be used to direct their behavior. The one who remains calm while others become emotional holds the position of power. The parent who simply looks disappointed rather than yelling. The leader who responds to a mistake with silence rather than criticism. The unexpressed judgment often cuts deeper than any spoken word because the imagination fills the gap with something worse than reality. Our minds are wired to fill in missing information, and what we imagine in the silence is usually far more severe than what might have been said. Watch how a skilled interrogator uses silence. After asking a difficult question, they simply wait. The average person can tolerate only a few seconds of silence before they feel compelled to speak, to clarify, to fill the uncomfortable void. In that moment of discomfort, they often reveal more than they intended, simply to escape the psychological pressure of silence. The third dimension is perhaps the most powerful: timing manipulation. The one who controls when silence begins and ends controls the rhythm of every interaction. They speak when others are receptive, remain silent when resistance is high, and use pauses to emphasize their most important points. They understand that the impact of words depends not just on their content, but on the silence that surrounds them. Machiavelli noted that timing was everything when he wrote, "The wise man does at once what the fool does finally." But wisdom sometimes means doing nothing when fools rush to act. Patience, strategic inaction, forces others to move first, to reveal their strategy while yours remains hidden. The villain doesn't just know what to do, they know when to do it, and perhaps more importantly, when not to. Consider how this plays out in conflict. The first person to lose composure almost always loses the upper hand. The one who can maintain silence, who can observe without reacting, gains critical information about their opponent's emotional triggers, insecurities, and tactics. They can then use this information to respond precisely when and how it will be most effective. There's a reason why in legal settings the right to remain silent is considered fundamental. Speaking impulsively creates vulnerability. Each word becomes evidence, each emotional outburst a potential weapon for your opponent. The strategic villain understands that words, once spoken, can never be unsaid, but silence can always be broken at the moment of their choosing. But there's another aspect to the power of silence that few recognize. Silence creates presence. When you speak constantly, people hear your words, but don't feel your presence. When you speak rarely, but with precision, your very presence becomes heightened, magnetic. You occupy more space in their awareness simply by creating contrast through strategic silence. Notice how the most powerful people in any room often seem to occupy more space than their physical bodies require. This isn't just charisma, it's the deliberate creation of presence through the strategic use of silence. They don't fill every moment with noise, they allow tension to build. They understand that power doesn't need to announce itself constantly. This is what truly separates those who understand power from those who merely crave it. The craving for power leads to overcompensation. Too many words, too many actions, too much self-promotion. True power rests in knowing you don't need to prove anything. The lion doesn't need to roar to convince others it's a lion. Its silence contains all the power it needs. Think about historical figures who mastered this art. Stalin was known for his strategic silence in meetings, letting others speak first, noting who said what, using that information later. Steve Jobs used long, uncomfortable silences to test people's confidence in their ideas. Queen Elizabeth I was famous for her ability to listen without revealing her own thoughts, giving her the upper hand in every diplomatic exchange. These techniques aren't inherently good or evil, they're tools. What matters is how they're wielded and to what end. But understanding them is essential, whether you aim to use them or to recognize when they're being used against you. The villain doesn't just use silence, they understand the rhythm between silence and speech. They know when to withdraw and when to advance. They recognize that absence can create more desire for their presence than presence itself. Consider how scarcity creates value. The leader who is always available becomes taken for granted. The one who makes themselves scarce becomes sought after. Their time becomes valuable precisely because it's limited. Their words carry weight because they aren't wasted on trivialities. This is the paradox of presence. Sometimes you must withdraw to increase your influence. The strategic retreat, the calculated absence, creates a vacuum that pulls others toward you rather than requiring you to chase them. The villain doesn't fear silence because they don't fear themselves. They're comfortable in their own skin, in their own thoughts. The constant talker fears what might emerge in the silence: doubts, insecurities, the possibility that they have nothing of value to say. If you want to develop this skill, begin with small exercises. Practice waiting 3 seconds before responding in conversation. Notice how others react to this slight delay. Observe how uncomfortable it makes them, how it shifts the dynamic. In meetings or negotiations, ask questions rather than making statements. Let others expose their positions while you gather information. Practice saying, "I'll need to think about that," instead of giving immediate answers. On social media, resist the urge to respond immediately to provocations. Observe how attacking comments often reveal more about the attacker than their target. Use that information strategically in your response, or choose not to respond at all. The silent villain doesn't need to announce their power. They don't need constant validation or approval. They know that true power lies not in forcing others to listen to you, but in making them unable to ignore you even in your silence. As Sun Tzu said, "Let your plans be dark and impenetrable as night, and when you move, fall like a thunderbolt." The contrast between strategic silence and decisive action creates an aura of power that no amount of constant talking can match. The most dangerous opponent isn't the one who threatens loudly. It's the one watching silently, gathering information, choosing the perfect moment to act. By the time they make their move, it's already too late to counter effectively. This is the strategy of villains, the power of silence, the lesson that both Sun Tzu and Machiavelli understood centuries ago, but remains forgotten in our noise-filled world. Sometimes the most powerful move is no move at all. The most influential statement is the one left unspoken. Remember, in a world where everyone is speaking, the advantage belongs to those who have mastered the art of strategic silence. If you found value in these insights, subscribe for more exploration of power dynamics and psychological strategies.